Margaret and Chidi had been married for a little over a year. Margaret, a hardworking and respectful woman, owned a small tailoring shop in Oka, while her husband, Chidi, worked as a mechanic. Though they were not wealthy, they were well respected in the community for their diligence and responsibility. But life had not always been easy for them. Before their marriage, Chidi was a struggling man, broke and barely surviving. His workshop was failing and he often found himself in debt. While other men in the village were climbing their social ladder, Chidi was stuck, unable to provide much for himself, let alone a wife. Margaret, on the other hand, was different. She had ambition. She worked tirelessly in her small shop, sewing clothes from morning till night, while women her age dreamed of marrying rich men. Margaret dreamed of building something of her own with Chidi. Many people in the village mocked her. "Why waste your time with a lazy man like Chidi?" The village women whispered. "Margaret, you are young and hardworking. You deserve a man who can take care of you." The elders told her. Even her own family turned against her. Her parents, seeing her beauty and potential, introduced her to wealthy suitors, men with land, money and status. They begged her to marry someone more suitable, someone who could give her an easier life. But Margaret refused. "I love Chidi," she told them. "He may be struggling now, but I believe in him. Together we will build a future." Her parents were furious. "If you marry that useless man, don't ever come back to this house," her father thundered. True to their word, they cut her off. No financial support, no visits, nothing. Margaret became an outcast in her own home, but she did not waver. She stayed by Chidi's side, supporting him, helping him rebuild his workshop with the little money she made. She sewed tirelessly, putting food on their table while Chidi couldn't. And just when life seemed unbearable, their prayers were answered. A year into their marriage, Margaret became pregnant. The news filled their home with joy. When she gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Chike, it felt like a blessing from above. Chidi held his son for the first time, tears in his eyes. "You stood by me when no one else did," he whispered to Margaret. "I promise I will never let you down." Margaret smiled, believing in his words. Little did she know, the man she sacrificed everything for would soon become her worst nightmare. After the birth of Chike, everything changed. Chidi was no longer the man Margaret had once known, the man she had stood by when he had nothing. He barely spent time at home, and when Margaret questioned his whereabouts, he either ignored her or snapped at her. At first, she thought it was the pressure of work, but soon she realized it was something else, something worse. Chidi had become a regular at a popular bar in town, where he spent most of his nights drinking, partying and wasting money on women who only cared about his wallet. One night, while Margaret sat at home rocking baby Chike to sleep, her husband was in the VIP section of the bar, drowning himself in alcohol. Music blasted from the speakers as women, dressed in tight revealing clothes, moved their bodies seductively, twerking and swaying to the beat. Chidi sat comfortably, a bottle of expensive liquor in one hand and a thick wad of cash in the other. He grinned as he tossed the money into the air, watching the women scramble for it with excitement. Beside him sat Peter, his so-called best friend, the one he always called his backbone. Peter took a sip of his drink and smirked as he watched the display before him. "This is exactly where your money is supposed to go," Peter said, nudging Chidi. "Not on that cheap thing you call a wife." Chidi threw his head back and laughed loudly. He was already drunk, his vision hazy, his thoughts reckless. "Margaret," he scoffed, shaking his head. "That woman is worthless, cheap. She should be grateful I even let her stay in my house." Peter burst into laughter, clinking his glass against Chidi's. "That one still smells like sewing machine engine. My guy, you should have dumped her a long time ago." Chidi smirked and took another long sip of his drink. His mind was clouded with alcohol, his heart filled with arrogance. "I wasted my time with her," he continued, "always nagging, always complaining. Now I'm a free man, enjoying life the way I should." Just then, a curvy woman with bold red lipstick slid onto Chidi's lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. She whispered something into his ear, her fingers trailing down his chest. Chidi chuckled, pulling her closer, completely oblivious to the fact that the very woman he mocked was at home, praying for him, waiting for him, hoping he would change. Peter lifted his glass. "To real enjoyment, my brother." "To real enjoyment," Chidi echoed as they both burst into laughter, drowning into their temporary pleasure. Meanwhile, outside the bar, a concerned neighbor stood watching from a distance. He had seen this same scene play out so many times. Chidi, drunk and reckless, throwing away his money on meaningless pleasures while his wife suffered in silence. Sighing, the neighbor pulled out his phone and dialed Margaret's number. When she picked up, his voice was low, filled with pity. "Margaret, your husband is drunk again. He's making a fool of himself. We might want to come and get him from the gutter." Margaret closed her eyes, her heart sinking. How much longer could she keep doing this? It was a bright afternoon and Margaret was busy attending to customers at her shop when she suddenly remembered something. She had forgotten a customer's material at home. Knowing she needed it urgently, she decided to rush home and retrieve it. As she stepped into the house, something felt off. The sitting room was unusually messy, with clothes scattered across the floor. Her heart pounded in suspicion. Slowly, she made her way to the bedroom, her mind racing with possibilities. She pushed the door open, and there, on their matrimonial bed, was Chidi. Not alone. Beside him lay a younger, more voluptuous woman, wrapped in the very sheets Margaret had spent her hard-earned money to buy. They were startled by her sudden presence, but neither looked ashamed. The woman simply pulled the blanket over herself, while Chidi sat up lazily rubbing his eyes as if Margaret had just interrupted his nap. Margaret's hand trembled with rage. "Chidi, what is the meaning of this?" she screamed. Chidi said nothing. He simply reached for his trousers on the floor and started dressing up. "Who is she?" Margaret turned to the woman, who smirked at her and said nothing. Fuming, Margaret stormed out of the house. She couldn't believe what she had just seen. The man she had loved, the father of her child, had been cheating on her under their own roof. That evening, when Chidi finally came home, Margaret confronted him. Chidi, after everything I have done for you, after everything we have been through, this is how you repay me? She asked, her voice shaking. Chidi, however, seemed unfazed. He leaned back in his chair and responded with a smirk. Margaret, why are you acting surprised? You know men are polygamous in nature. One woman is never enough for us. His words hit her like a slap. Margaret felt betrayed, humiliated and deeply hurt. Refusing to let it slide, she reported the issue to Chidi's family, hoping they would reprimand him and talk some sense into him. But to her shock, they all took his side. His mother, instead of showing concern, simply sighed and said, "My daughter, men will always be men. It is your duty as a wife to pray for him. One day he will change." His father nodded in agreement. No woman breaks her home over something like this. If you leave, another woman will take your place. Be wise, Margaret. Margaret couldn't believe what she was hearing. "So you all think this is normal?" she asked, looking at them in disbelief. Chidi's elder sister even chuckled. "You should be grateful he is still providing for you." Margaret walked out of the house, disgusted and heartbroken. She had expected support, but instead, she had been told to endure. As she made her way home, one thing became clear to her. She was on her own, and if that was the case, she would have to handle this in her own way. The days that followed were nothing short of torment for Margaret. Chidi made no effort to hide his reckless behavior. He came home late, reeking of alcohol and cheap perfume, and sometimes didn't come home at all. The love and respect they once shared had completely faded, replaced by arrogance and betrayal. Margaret often sat alone, remembering how they had struggled together to build a home, how they had worked hard to make something out of themselves. Now, everything was crumbling before her eyes. One afternoon, while at her shop, Margaret started feeling weak. A sudden wave of feverish chills washed over her. Her body ached all over. At first, she thought it was exhaustion, but when the symptoms persisted for days, she decided to go for a checkup. The doctor ran some tests, and when he finally called her into the office, the look on his face sent shivers down her spine. "Madam Margaret," he said cautiously, "I need you to be strong. Your test results came back positive with HIV." For a moment, the world stopped. Margaret felt as if the walls were closing in on her. HIV? How? She was a faithful wife. She had never been with any other man except Chidi. Then realization hit her like a lightning bolt. Chidi. Tears streamed down her face as the doctor's voice became a distant echo in her ears. She felt betrayed, foolish for trusting him, even after knowing about his reckless affairs. That night, as Chidi lay in bed, snoring drunkenly, Margaret sat beside him, staring at the man who had ruined her life. Her hand trembled as she carefully pricked his finger with a small needle and collected a drop of his blood. The next morning, she took his blood sample to the clinic for a test. Hours later, her suspicion was confirmed. Chidi was HIV positive. Anger and bitterness consumed her. He had been careless, sleeping around like a stray dog, and now he had infected her with a disease that had no cure. She rushed to get her son Chike tested. As she waited for the results, she could barely breathe, silently begging God for mercy. When the doctor finally handed her the report, she exhaled sharply. Chike was negative. For the first time in weeks, she felt relief, but it was short-lived. The man she had sacrificed everything for had destroyed her life, and his family had encouraged her to pray for him. Pray? No, she would not pray. She would not beg, and she would not cry. Chidi had played with her life. Now, she would make sure he regretted it. Margaret wiped her tears and looked at herself in the mirror. The weak, heartbroken woman she saw before was gone. In her place was someone new. It was time for revenge. Margaret was not a woman to be played with. If Chidi thought he could betray her and walk away unscathed, he was about to learn the hard way that when a woman seeks revenge, even the devil sits down to take notes. The first phase of her plan was simple but crucial. She carefully took the original documents of their properties, their house and Chi's workshop, and replaced them with copies. Then she met with her lawyer to begin processing her divorce. But she didn't stop there. She also took copies of the property documents to Chidi's shop. The fool had no idea that he was about to lose everything. Next, Margaret moved on to phase 2. She started with Peter, Chidi's so-called backbone, the man who had encouraged her husband's reckless behavior, introduced him to other women, and dismissed her when she begged for help. Margaret invited Peter out for drinks, pretending to be in need of comfort. Flattered, Peter gladly accepted, but what he didn't know was that Margaret had spiked his drink. Soon enough, he dozed off, completely unaware of what was happening. Without hesitation, she took out a syringe filled with her infected blood and injected him. "Now, let's see how you enjoy life, Peter," she whispered, watching him snore away, oblivious to the nightmare she had just gifted him. But she wasn't done. She did the same to Chidi's elder sister. She moved on to Chidi's family, the very people who had told her to pray for her husband while he destroyed her life. First was Chidi's father, a man just as shameless as his son. Margaret had discovered that he had an eye for younger women, and she used that to her advantage. With a little seduction, she lured him into bed and infected him just as she had done with Peter. Like father, like son. What a disgraceful family, she muttered as she walked out of his house. As for Chidi's mother, Margaret didn't even need to touch her. She simply waited for the perfect moment, and when the old woman was asleep, she ejected her too. With her revenge set in motion, Margaret patiently waited for 1 week before making her final move. She called for a family meeting. Everyone was confused. Why had Margaret suddenly called them together? They gathered, murmuring among themselves. Chidi sat in the center, as arrogant as ever, while Peter and his father were unusually quiet. Margaret stood in front of them, holding a brown envelope. "I called you all here for an important announcement," she said, her voice calm but firm. Slowly, She pulled out Chidi's hospital test results and placed them on the table. Your beloved son Chidi has been living with HIV and has unknowingly infected me. The room fell silent. Chidi's mother gasped, clutching her chest. Chidi's father started to sweat, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Chidi, the shameless man that he was, only laughed. Margaret, my beloved wife, you know we are in this together. So why don't we just stay together and take care of ourselves? Margaret smirked, her eyes filled with cold fury. Oh, my dear husband, I might be HIV positive, but what is about to hit you will make your health even worse. She turned to his father. Papa Chidi, you are looking nervous. Could it be because you know exactly how you got infected? The old man's face turned pale. Margaret took a step closer, her voice dripping with venom. Yes, everyone, your dear father here has been sleeping around just like his son. And guess what? He slept with me, his daughter-in-law. A shocked gasp filled the room. Chidi's mother let out a scream. What? You slept with my husband? She shrieked, slapping her husband across the face. Margaret simply shrugged. I only gave him what he deserved. Then she turned to Peter. Peter, you might be wondering why I included you in this mess. Well, let me remind you. I came to you, begging you to talk sense into my husband. But instead you insulted me. You called me a cheap housewife, while you were the one introducing my husband to all those women. Well, guess what? Now you will pay for it too. Peter sat frozen, his lips trembling. He understood what she meant. They had infected him too. Chidi, finally realizing the weight of the situation, fell to his knees and began to cry. But Margaret was not done. She pulled out a second set of papers, the divorce papers. Oh, and one more thing, she said, throwing the document at Chidi's feet. You better vacate this house and your workshop because my buyers are coming soon. These properties no longer belong to you. Chidi's mouth fell open in shock. Margaret, you wouldn't. I already did. She cut him off. Without another word, Margaret picked up her son, turned her back on them and walked out of the house forever. As she stepped into the waiting car that would take her and Chike to the city, she didn't look back. Behind her, Chidi and the rest of his miserable family sat in silence, each blaming themselves for their misfortune. After leaving Oka, Margaret made a solemn promise to herself. Her son Chike would never suffer the way she did. He would grow up in a stable, loving environment, far away from betrayal and toxicity. She would give him the best education and opportunities, ensuring that his future was nothing like the past she had left behind. Margaret settled in a new city where no one knew her story. With the money she had secured from selling the properties, she rented a comfortable apartment and invested in a tailoring business. She knew that her condition required constant medical attention, so she made it a priority to get proper treatment. With time, she learned to manage her health, taking her medications religiously and living a healthier lifestyle. Despite her challenges, she worked harder than ever. She upgraded her tailoring skills, introduced modern designs, and soon Her shop became one of the most sought-after fashion houses in the city. Wealthy clients and high-profile individuals admired her work, and within a few years, Margaret was no longer the struggling tailor from Oka. She was a successful businesswoman. As for Chike, he thrived in his new environment. Margaret enrolled him in one of the best schools, ensuring he had everything he needed to succeed. He grew up watching his mother's determination and strength, and it inspired him to be hardworking and disciplined. One evening, as Margaret sat in her well-furnished living room watching Chike do his homework, she realized something. She had won. She had risen from betrayal and heartbreak. She had taken control of her destiny. Chidi and his family were nothing but a distant memory, lost in the consequences of their own actions. She smiled to herself. When a woman wants revenge, even the devil sits and learns. And with that, she embraced the beautiful life she had built, one filled with success, peace, and most importantly, freedom. The end. We have come to the end of this wonderful story. Do you think Margaret's revenge was extreme? Put your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe and put on your notification for more interesting videos on this channel. Stay blessed.